I am thrilled to introduce you to one of the women that I am lucky enough to collaborate on a regular basis, Kate Daly of Closed Loop. Kate serves on a work stream with me as part of the U.S. Plastics Pack and is by far one of the most knowledgeable and well-spoken speakers on this topic that I get to work with on a regular basis. If you're not familiar with Closed Loop, they are an investment firm and innovative space that is focused on driving profitable and innovative new solutions to the packaging industry. And Kate is going to be talking about us in ways that to incorporate innovation and new ways of thinking as we're working to solve this complex problem. So take it away, Kate.
Hi, I'm Kate Daly, Managing Director of the Center for the Circular Economy at Closed Loop Partners, and I'm delighted to join UnPacked21 today to discuss the future of circular packaging. Closed Loop Partners is a hybrid investment firm and innovation center focused on building a circular economy, a new economic model focused on a profitable and sustainable future. The circular economy is the most significant restructuring of global commerce since the Industrial Revolution. It's an overhaul of how products are designed, manufactured, sold, refurbished, and recycled to make new products. And it's a framework for global corporations and startups alike to reduce costs, increase efficiency, and protect the environment we share. We know that to achieve a waste-free future for plastics and packaging, there is no silver bullet, there's no one solution. An array of different solutions are needed. When rebuilding a more circular packaging system, it's important to consider systems that are consciously designed to use fewer materials in the production and delivery of products, and to keep materials in circulation at their highest value for as many generations as possible, if not infinitely. And across both our investment firm and innovation center, as we work to build the circular economy, we see two major categories of innovation. First, new delivery models like reuse and refill, and second, new material innovations that can replace traditional single-use packaging. One example I'd like to focus on is a company called Algramo, based in Chile. Algramo offers low-cost refillable smart packaging to be used with its vending machines, which dispense staple products such as household cleaners or personal cleaners by the gram. Not only does it reduce single-use packaging waste by allowing you to bring your own container or providing a refillable container, it also allows families to buy exactly what they can afford. They can get the exact quantity of products they need and still get bulk pricing, no matter how small the amount. This service is not just the more sustainable option, it's also the more affordable option. And if we're to transition to the circular economy, we must make circular business models and products accessible and inclusive. Algramo already operates in more than 2,000 family-owned stores in Santiago, reaching more than 300,000 customers. And they've recently expanded into North America, and in partnership with Closed Loop Partners, have launched 3 pilots in Brooklyn and Manhattan. We're really excited to see how this can work in a North American market and really bringing together sustainability and affordability. The second area where we're seeing fast growth is material innovation. And here we have an opportunity to align materials with recovery pathways like recycling and composting systems, while reducing the need to extract raw materials. A few examples include aluminum. While it's certainly not a new material, many companies are looking to see what role can aluminum play, since it's an infinitely recyclable material with higher than average recycling rates compared to some other materials. Second, paper is really the subject of a lot of innovation when looking at coatings and liners. And in the case of the image here of this fiber cup, looking at how to replace polyethylene liners with liners that are compostable, that are accepted in recycling streams, and are desirable as a material that can have infinite life. And so there's a great deal of testing that still needs to be done to establish what coated papers can be accepted in recycling streams and in composting streams. Third, we are seeing a lot of innovation in the area of biopolymers, or materials that naturally occur in the environment. For example, one example would be algae. And this is a rapidly growing category for both recyclable and compostable alternatives to single-use plastic. And finally, nanocellulosic materials are perhaps the earliest stage of all of these, and they create alternatives that look and function like plastics, but are made of cellulose and are compostable. And at Closed Loop Partners, we work to bring together brands to identify emerging innovations such as these and identify how they can align with our brand partners' operational systems and really de-risk that innovation so that it can enter a global marketplace and that these innovative solutions can scale in the best possible way. One example of our work in that area is our Next Gen Consortium in partnership with founding partners McDonald's and Starbucks and many other partners that you see here. And this brings together the brands, industry experts, and innovators to reimagine food service packaging and to accelerate sustainable and circular solutions to reduce waste on a global scale. And through our Next Gen Cup Challenge and initiative, we seek to advance recoverable solutions for the fiber, hot and cold to-go cup system, your coffee cup. And through this, have been doing a huge amount of in-market testing and piloting and really identifying what are the solutions that can ensure that we no longer have 250 billion disposable cups going into landfill or not being recovered every year. And this sort of holistic systems-based approach, we've also brought to another challenge with single use, and that is our retail consortium of bringing together some of the United States' biggest retailers to address the challenge of the single-use plastic bag. And these brands are coming together pre-competitively to solve a shared challenge. And the Beyond the Bag Challenge, which is a collaboration with Closed Loop Partners, CVS Health, Target, and Walmart, and many, many other major retailers and partners, has conducted a global solution search to more sustainable alternatives to the single-use plastic bag. And we've received more than 400 submissions from around the world. We shortlisted 58 solutions and are announcing the winners in February, and are really looking at how do we identify ways to get our goods home, whether from point of sale inside a store, curbside pickup, or local delivery, and not rely upon single use, but rather look at reusable options, tech-enabled options that require no bag at all, and also innovative materials that can look at things in a different way. And I would say one example that we're also looking at in our work is where is there an opportunity for depackaging, not just switching to another type of packaging, but eliminating packaging altogether. And an example of that is a company that we've invested in that's called Mori. Mori uses a natural silk protein to create a tasteless, invisible protective layer over food, and it slows down the three key mechanisms that make food spoil: dehydration, oxidation, and microbial growth. So it reduces food waste, but it also minimizes the need for plastic packaging. It's most relevant for fresh foods, seafood, and meats. And they're also working to integrate this coating into paper packaging to make the paper act more like the multi-layer plastic pouches so prevalent today, and which are very hard to recycle. And so any opportunity we have to identify solutions and alternatives to multi-layer plastic materials that aren't being successfully recovered, those are areas of great exploration for us. Another company that we've invested in is Temperpac. And this is a fast-growing company that it serves as a replacement for expanded polystyrene foam, which we've all seen as the foam peanuts that come in some packing materials. Temperpac manufactures sustainable insulated fiber packaging for cold chain shipments for the perishable food and pharmaceutical industries as a drop-in replacement to foam. This is particularly relevant for e-commerce and reduces waste from polystyrene, and also reduces contamination in recycling facilities, which is a factor that we really need to think about as well. And so, in conclusion, I would say innovation alone is not the answer. We've looked at a lot of really exciting innovations in this presentation, but there's so many other pieces of the puzzle. First is industry consensus on solutions that need to be scaled, that align with recovery systems. We also need to together identify a path forward that addresses the regulatory environments, availability of municipal funding, and infrastructure development that could align packaging with recovery systems, whether that's recycling or composting. Incentives that address key barriers along the value chain, it's critical that we identify and implement those incentives to make whole everyone along the value chain so that it's economically viable. And there's a huge priority for us to identify ways to eliminate contamination in our recovery facilities when packaging has different breakdown rates in a composting facility, when packaging that should go to recycling ends up in a composting facility and vice versa, and concerns about contaminants in both of those streams. And how do we get there? Well, in addition to collaboration, we see investment in infrastructure and in innovation as the key. And that sort of investment can bolster processing capacity and lead to better outcomes for compostable packaging. So while the innovations that I shared today represent a snapshot in time, we're really seeing the growth of circular packaging systems and supply chain innovation across the board based on market signals being sent by major retailers and consumer brands who are making big commitments and investments into these solutions. And so I encourage all of you to find ways to partner with innovators and to work collaboratively so that together we can de-risk these emerging innovations, align them with the realities of the marketplace, and help scale promising solutions that can bring us into a more circular future for our packaging and all of the other areas of our work. So many thanks to the Pet Sustainability Coalition for inviting me to join the conversation, and I look forward to your questions.
Good afternoon, Kate. Thank you so much for joining us and for that really impactful talk. We've got lots of questions for you, but one I wanted to ask just straight away is, we have members who, I often get emails of, I've heard of this new thing, I've heard of this new thing, I've heard of this new thing. I'm not going to change our packaging today because I hear this is 1 or 2 years off, and so we're just going to wait for that. What advice would you give a brand or a supplier in that space of staying attuned to the innovation space, but also making some decisions on how to make improvements now?
I think at the heart of a lot of the work that we're doing at Closed Loop Partners, we understand how frustrating it can be to be really overwhelmed with the volume and diversity of innovations that are in the marketplace today. And I think that one of the challenges is that the more diversity there is, especially in packaging, the further away we get from being aligned with our recovery systems. But at the same time, the current status quo is not satisfactory to anybody. And so there's this drive to identify the next thing that can solve for these issues. And I would say that it's important not to ignore all of these innovations, but rather to constantly ask yourself a series of questions. And these are the questions that we ask before we invest in a company that we think has promise to deliver on what's needed for the next year, 5 years, 10 years. And that is looking at, what is the downstream recovery plan for this particular material? Is it a hybrid material? Is it multi-layer? Is it something that needs to be disassembled but can't? And upstream, what is the impact of this? Is it something that is recyclable or compostable? And that's great, but the carbon footprint is so high that you're actually creating more of an unintended negative consequence, more of a trade-off than you planned. So I think through a series of questions that you ask, you can start to winnow out really who are the winners who are going to emerge against their competitors. But at the same time, it's a challenging question. And I think a lot of the work that we do at Closed Loop is about de-risking those decisions and making sure that we can start to introduce some standards and criteria so that the industry working together can identify the path that needs to be gone down with material types that are recoverable. And we're not there yet, and there's a lot of work that we need to do together to get there.
So you brought up a very good point around investing in innovations based on the current landscape and infrastructure that we have right now. There you are. Hi, Kate. At the PSC, we have a broad range of membership, everybody from brands to packaging suppliers to retailers, and really the entire value chain. Where do you think, and what advice can you provide to our members as to where where is an appropriate place for them to play in that infrastructure, that legislation piece that we really need to be working on these solutions?
Well, you're absolutely right that policy is critical here. And I think one of the challenges that we see is that the inconsistency in regulations, not only is it driving a lot of our corporate and retail partners crazy because they have to manage for different outcomes and regulations in different states, but again, it is also introducing unintended consequences. And one example that I'll draw upon from our consortium to reinvent the retail bag is that as bans on single-use plastic bags go into place in cities and states around the country, some of those bans then require retailers to turn to an alternative, including paper. And paper comes with a host of its own challenges. It's often more expensive. There's sometimes a much higher carbon footprint. It's sometimes difficult to get a high recycled content depending on your supplier. And so we are really encouraging people to work collaboratively in order to come up with best practices and recommendations for the NGOs, who are often the voices that are going to legislators. And in our consortia, in our partnerships with brands, we typically compile best practices so that we can manage that education component. And that's where working closely with groups like PSC and other trade associations, like many of my colleagues who appeared on the panel just before me, SPC, the Recycling Partnership, these are organizations that are very effective at identifying and assessing the trade-offs and unintended consequences so that we're not just rushing away from plastic, but rushing towards something that is a viable future. And I think that legislators are hungry for this type of information, but aren't always getting the full picture. And I think that's really critical.
Great, Kate, thank you for that. I have one last question, and then I'm going to throw it over to the audience. What advice can you give to some of our PSC members who are on the call today who are really interested and want to stay involved in this innovative space, but maybe don't have a huge R&D budget or a huge innovation budget? Is there a way for them to still stay active and supportive of this conversation without, maybe a huge check to write?
It's a great point. Not all of us are investment firms, and not all of us want to gamble on early stage innovations, but rather we want to know who are the winners and how do we align with them. And so, again, I would say that the work that we do at Closed Loop Partners, where we bring competitors together, we turn competitors into collaborators, we always partner with brands at a diversity of levels. And bring on partners at the level that they can afford. And we really are looking at this in the long term. We take a systemic, holistic approach. There is no easy answer this year. And I know that a lot of the suppliers and manufacturers are equally frustrated by this, and they want the brands and retailers just to tell them, what do you want? What's best? But there isn't an easy answer. There's a lot of dialogue that we have to have. And so I would encourage your members and brands who want to investigate this without having to invest in a portfolio, but rather through a collaborative and educational approach, please feel free to reach out to Closed Loop Partners and, of course, the Sustainable Packaging Coalition, the Recycling Partnership. These are all wonderful organizations that have a big focus on education that can help de-risk the investment that you're making in these very important issues that require you to change your supply chain and in some cases the way of doing business. So these are not things to be entered into lightly. We understand that.
Great, thanks, Kate. Once again, Kate is one of our speakers that I could pick her brain all morning, but I also want to give our audience an opportunity to do so as well. Caitlin, what questions do we have coming in the chat?
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. So I was just talking with Melissa in between sessions, and she was mentioning, Kate, how great you are. You mentioned we turn competitors into collaborators, and Melissa mentioned that several times in some of the calls you guys have been on, that you've done just a really great job navigating with lots of different partners with different ideas about which direction to go. So just wanted to give you some personal props for all the hard work you do to bring industries together around this. So a couple of questions have come in from our attendees. The first is, has COVID slowed any of Closed Loop's initiatives, particularly thinking about the tech space?
That's a great question. And I have to say, I was so surprised throughout 2020 the ways in which our partners did not put a pause on sustainability. we launched our consortium to reinvent the retail bag in July of last year. We have several other initiatives that we were able to launch during the pandemic, of course, even now. And so I think, to me, even this change in the past 3 years or 5 years, where sustainability has come front and center and is now more and more seen as part of the business bottom line, as being linked to a license to operate, and as a risk mitigation measure for shareholder activism, social media activism, and even investor scrutiny with many of these companies. And so we did not see any slowdown at all during COVID. And we're very heartened by that as a signal of the way that multiple industries across different sectors continue to think about sustainability as an essential, not a nice to have.
Well, that is great news to hear, that the investment community is active and you've been able to maintain all of the R&D initiatives that you set out to do. So that's great news. So I have a little bit of a philosophical question for you. So, you represent an investment group, right? So that's looking at putting both corporate and individual dollars toward these initiatives. And I'm curious, how did we get into the situation where in some ways we're looking for private investment to come in and fix what seems to be some problems that were created by business players in some ways? So I'm curious to learn from you, how did we get here today? And talk to me a little bit about kind of how we can see the investment community as an opportunity to really push us through some of the barriers we're facing.
I think the investment community plays an incredibly important role in terms of catalyzing capital in a space that is disrupting the status quo. And it's not always the case that business is willing to disrupt its own status quo. And so these investments in disruptors and entrepreneurs and startups that are looking at things in different ways, and in particular deploying tech platforms in entirely new ways that align with the way that we're living now, is incredibly important. And I do see that in the US, in the context of the circular economy, the corporate business community has played a really strong leadership role and has really been going really hand in hand and in tandem with the investment community. This Closed Loop Partners is, in terms of the circular economy, the biggest investor in the United States, and there's still a tremendous capital gap for this kind of work. And our corporate partners and corporate America, we've seen them stepping up in the absence of any sort of national regulation or mandates or funding. There are no carrots or sticks in the US to advance circularity right now, as compared to somewhere like Europe or other countries where there is funding available, and also a strict but consistent regulatory environment that is ambitiously there are efforts to create. And I think in the absence of that in the US, the private sector has had to step up, and it really has been both business and investment that has come to the table to try to advance a very challenging long-term and systemic transition away from a deeply problematic status quo that no longer serves our needs.
Thanks for that perspective, and I agree. The investment community has started to look at solutions and really supporting startups like so many that you mentioned to really start to disrupt the status quo. What are the ways we can support entrepreneurial communities, get access to funding for those who would not normally have access through traditional methodology. So your work is so inspiring, and we have a question from an attendee as to whether or not individuals can invest through your platform, or what would be the opportunity for attendees to participate in your work and support it financially.
At Closed Loop Partners, we have a diversity of funding platforms. And so while many of our funds invest in infrastructure, and our partners and investors are comprised of major brands and retailers like Coke and Pepsi, Amazon, Unilever, et cetera, we also have a fund called our Venture Fund that invests in early stage innovations like the ones that I just shared, Mori, Algramo, and that fund is open to individuals as well as other types of investors. And so if you're interested in investing in early stage companies with a circular business model or a circular product that we have vetted very carefully to be part of our portfolio, I encourage you reach out directly to me or to our team. We'd love to have a conversation with you.
All right. Well, that wraps up our Q&A from the audience. Thank you again so much, Kate, for your participation today.